Hi everybody, today I'm going to be sharing my bone broth recipe with you along with some tricks and tips to make it really wiggly and jiggly and just full of collagen. So I've been making bone broth for over 6 years now, and it helped me so much in healing my own chronic gut issues, and I have learned so many tips and tricks to get it perfect over the years, so I want to share those with you today. I remember I used to see people sharing their broth like on Instagram, and it would be so gelatinous, it looked like jello, and I really struggled to get mine that way in the beginning. So yeah, like I said, I have a lot of tips for you to get it that gelatinous. And if you're wondering why you should even bother getting it to be like a solid jello when it's cooled off, it's because it has a lot more collagen. Collagen and gelatin are basically the same thing, and that is the biggest nutrient in bone broth that's going to help heal your gut lining and heal your gut. Also, just so you know, the full written recipe is available on my blog, hearttokitchen.com, and I will have a link down below to that. So let's get into it. The very first step is selecting your bones. So for this recipe, you're going to want about 3.5 pounds of bones. If you don't have a scale, that's about a gallon-sized plastic bag full of bones. Now, I personally use chicken feet. They are my favorite. I have found them to be the most reliable for getting a very gelatinous broth that also tastes really good. It tastes kind of like chicken noodle soup, so that's definitely my favorite. But I'll also use chicken backs sometimes, and then just some extra bones from cooking throughout the week. So I'll cook a whole chicken sometimes, and I'll save all the bones from that just in a bag in the freezer. You can also use a Tupperware, and then I'll bring those out when it's time to cook my broth. When you're selecting your bones, you want to think about which ones are going to be the most collagen rich. So that's going to be joints, areas where there's lots of connective tissue. Sometimes it'll be meat where it's like worked very hard. A lot of collagen will develop in muscles that are used a lot. And then bone marrow is going to be another great source. So I would recommend chicken feet, chicken backs, chicken necks, marrow bones, and oxtail are all awesome options. Now, if you are making meat stock, which is different than bone broth, you want to use a little bit meatier cuts, so you can just plop a whole chicken in the pot. You can use oxtail. Chicken feet will still work great for this too. Now, a quick note on why you might want to make meat stock. If you have very severe gut issues and histamine intolerance, the histamines in bone broth can be a bit much to handle sometimes. So in more severe cases, you want to start with meat stock first. It is easier for your body to tolerate, and then move to bone broth as you are able to tolerate it. Bone broth is more rich in collagen. It's going to be a lot harder to get a meat stock that is wiggly and jiggly, but it's still going to be very beneficial. So the main case is going to be when you have histamine intolerance, but if you want to learn more about whether bone broth or meat stock is a better option for you, you can check out this video. I have a link in the corner and down below on the differences between meat stock and bone broth and what's going to be better for you. But anyway, so yeah, you're just going to go a little meatier for meat stock, like a whole chicken instead of the bones from a whole chicken. So I also want to note the quality of your bones matters. The reason for this is that your body can bioaccumulate and store toxins in your connective tissue and in your fat. So a lot of heavy metals and Roundup and other pesticides and herbicides can actually be stored in your connective tissue, and the same thing is true of animals. So if you get bones from like a factory farm sick animal who was given a bunch of corn that was genetically modified and sprayed with Roundup and stuff like that, that's all going to be stored in their connective tissue. So in general, if you're having a harder time, beef tends to be a little cleaner, but you can also get a really good quality chicken. That's what I like to do. So just be aware, it should definitely be organic, and you just want to look for high quality. If you're going for beef, look for grass-fed. If you're going either way, antibiotic-free, hormone-free, all that good stuff, yeah, that's what you're going to want to look for. Also, homemade broth is far superior to store-bought broth because you can control the quality of the ingredients a lot more, and you can just make sure you're using the best stuff and that you're cooking it long enough, you're making sure it's collagen rich, and you're not cutting any corners. So homemade broth is going to be a lot more gut healing. All right, I know step 1 was long, but it's setting the foundation and it's really important. So step 2 is combine all of the ingredients in a pot. So you're going to place your bones in a large pot and add enough filtered water. Filtered is important, and then you're not going to be exposed to the toxins in tap water. But you want to fill it with enough filtered water to cover those bones by about 1.5 inches. If you add too much water here, you're going to dilute it and it won't be as collagen rich. So that is a really big point here. I used to put too much water in. Just barely cover those bones and that will work perfectly. You do want to cover them a little bit more, because if you just like barely cover them, you're not going to end up with very much broth. So 1.5 inches over is perfect. Then add the rest of the ingredients. So I like to add 3 large carrots that are chopped up, 2 celery ribs that are chopped up, a half of a large onion that's all sliced up, and 2 tablespoons of fresh parsley or 2 teaspoons of dried parsley, 3 garlic cloves that are peeled, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. This will help pull more minerals out of the bones and put it into your broth. And then 1 large piece of kombu seaweed. So that's kombu, it's Kombu. It is a type of seaweed that's traditionally used in Japanese meat stocks and broths, and it's very high in iodine, so it's a really good source of iodine. I use 1 sheet, sometimes 2. I make sure it's about 4 inches by 8 inches. Now, it's not me being too meticulous about that. It's more so that I wanted a good measurement for you to know how much I put in. So how much I put in is about 4 inches by 8 inches sheet. And yeah, so you put all of that in the pot. Then you also want to make sure there's like 1 inch of space at the top of your pot, because if you fill it like all the way to the brim, it's going to boil over and make a mess and you're going to lose a lot of water. So it's not going to work well. Oh, and then so one other note here is you can do this all in the morning. I personally will cut up the veggies, get the seaweed and all that together, and I'll put it in a Tupperware the day before. That way in the morning it's all ready and it's super quick. And I have a Berkey water filter, so when I take the water from the bottom, there's none, like it takes a while for the top part to filter and fill the bottom again. So I will also fill my pot the day before, so I'm not starting the morning by like taking all the water for the first hour or 2 for the day. So that's just a little tip that I have, but if you have a different filter, then it's going to be really easy. So the third step is it's time to cook. So you want to bring your broth ingredients to a covered boil over high heat. Once boiling, just reduce it to the lowest setting you have and let it simmer for hours and hours throughout the day. So I do about 12 hours. I start this around 7 in the morning and I finish it around 7 or 8 at night. You can also use a slow cooker if you want. So the thing is with the broth, if you're doing it on the stovetop like this, you do have to be home all day. When there are times that I need to leave, I will just turn off the pot and leave it sitting there and turn it back on when I come back home. It's not ideal, but if you do have to run out for an hour or so, it's going to work. I would not plan making this on a day that you're going to leave more than an hour in the middle of the day though, unless you have a slow cooker. So if you have a slow cooker, you can do all the same things, but put it in a slow cooker for 12 to 24 hours. You can also use a pressure cooker. Now the thing with the pressure cooker is it's going to make it cook way faster. So you still have to be home, but you can cook it in 3 hours instead. So you're using a pressure cooker, use 3 hours. If you're using a slow cooker, 12 to 24 hours. And if you are using a pot like I do, I recommend 12 hours. You can get away with like 9 hours though. So the longer cook time will help it pull more collagen out of the bones and will help you get a jigglier, more collagen rich broth. So I do really recommend 12 hours if you can make that happen. Now, if you are making meat stock, you're going to do this differently. You are only going to cook it for 2 to 4 hours on the stove top. The shorter cook time is going to result in way less histamines in your broth, and it's going to make it easier to tolerate if you have a super duper sensitive gut. So you're making meat stock, only cook it for 2 to 4 hours. The more sensitive you are, the shorter cook time you want to go. And as you become less sensitive to histamines, you want to go longer, because the longer cook time is going to mean more collagen in your broth. So the 2 to 4 hours there is for the stovetop time. I'm not sure exactly what you'd use for a pressure cooker or a slow cooker there. It would be shorter for a pressure cooker, maybe like 30 minutes. I would double check that though, and I'm not quite sure on a slow cooker. So look that up if you want to use a different thing. But I think 2 to 4 hours is pretty easy to be home for, to just make some stock on the stove. So if your broth is steaming a lot on that lowest setting, you're gonna want to turn it on and off throughout the day. Now I know this sounds tedious, but since making broth, I've lived in 3 different houses and I've learned different stoves are different. So my current house, it's awesome. I can just put it on the absolute lowest setting and it's fine. I won't lose too much water. But my previous house, the lowest setting just wasn't low enough and it would keep the broth too hot. It would steam a lot and I would lose a lot of the liquid. And then you end up with what should have been like 16 cups of broth is now like 4 cups of broth. And it's really disappointing. My first batch ever of bone broth, I made this mistake and it was really frustrating. So if this is you, if you're losing too much water while making your broth or meat stock, make sure it's low enough. So if it's just steaming a lot and you're losing a lot of liquid, you want to just turn it off for like 5 or 10 minutes and then turn it back on, lowest setting you have, let it go for like 10 or 30 minutes until it starts steaming a lot again and turn it off. I know it sounds tedious, but this is what I used to do. It's not too crazy. If you really get frustrated by that and your stove's not going low enough, you can always get a slow cooker or pressure cooker instead. But yeah, so try that. That worked really, really well for me. Also, if you're struggling with losing too much liquid, make sure your lid is really tight fitting and doesn't have like a little hole in it. That's going to help a lot as well. Okay, step 4 is to strain the broth. So once it's done, for me this will be in the evening, about 12 hours after I started it, you're gonna want to strain it. So take the lid off. It can be helpful to just like use something. I'll use a spatula that has like slits in it, so basically like a slitted spoon, and just kind of take some of the bones and veggies out so that they don't interfere with you straining. So I'll do that sometimes, but basically you just want to strain the broth. I like to use like a 4-cup measuring flask and put a big metal strainer on top of that and just pour it in. That works really, really well for me. And then from the flask, you can pour it into jars really easily. So that's what I like to do. But there are plenty of options there. Then yeah, just put them all in jars, leave the jars on the counter for a little bit. You want them to cool off a little bit before you put it in the fridge. So I'll just leave them on the counter till soon before I'm going to bed, and I'll put them in the fridge after that. So it's optional to save your bones to use a second time. Now, if you do this the second time, it will not have as much collagen in it, and it's not going to get jiggly. It just won't. You've already gotten too much collagen out of it. But I do get that bones can start to get a little bit expensive and you really want to get your money's worth, so you can do a second batch. I personally will do a second batch. I make bone broth twice a week, so I use the bones twice, and the second batch is never as jiggly. It's never as good, but it's still delicious and it's still full of a lot of collagen. So that is an option. You can just store those bones back in the freezer. Again, I do discard the veggies and do new of those though. Okay, step 5 is to store the broth. So bone broth will keep in your fridge for about a week, like 5 to 7 days. And so what I do is we go through it really fast. My fiance and I will eat it in 3 to 4 days. So I don't really have to worry about it going bad. I just put it in the fridge. But in the past, I used to make 2 big pots worth at once, and we didn't drink quite as much back then. It would last us for 2 weeks. So when that was the case, I would save it. Now, my favorite way to freeze broth is to pour it into ice cube trays or muffin tins or both, and then put that in the freezer. So I would do that, and then you can transfer it to a Tupperware or a bag and just leave the little broth cubes in the freezer. Then when you're ready to eat the broth, once you've worked through your broth stores in the fridge and you move on to the freezer, you can just take those cubes out and use those. I like that way better. If you're going to be doing like a few batches of that, you can just leave the stuff you're going to freeze in the fridge for now and do that over the next day or two. You can also freeze whole jars of broth, but be very careful with this. I broke like 5 jars and got really upset when I've done this before in the past. So here's what you need to do if you're going to go that route. Use newer jars. Do not use super old jars. They're just going to be more prone to cracking. So use newer jars. Ideally, like cool your broth off in the fridge first. But what you're going to want to do, do not put like steaming hot broth in a jar like right into the freezer. You need to cool it off first. So then you want to leave like an inch, just leave like 2 inches of, they call it head space, at the top of your jar that doesn't have any broth, because it's going to expand when it freezes. So leave 2 inches of just empty space at the top of your jars. Put them in the freezer and do not put the lids on. Now, wait to put the lids on until the jar is 100% frozen. This is where I went wrong last time. I waited till they were mostly frozen. So they still had a little bit of liquid, but were mostly frozen. Then I put the lids on and they almost all of them cracked. Even though I left space at the top, like, I don't know, it didn't work good. So make sure they're totally frozen and then you can put the lids on. So this is going to take a little bit longer to thaw. So if you do this method, know that they might be in the fridge for, I don't know, I haven't really done this much. So 2 days, 3 days, I'm not quite sure how long it would take to thaw, of pulling that out and bringing it into the fridge. So you'll kind of learn through experimenting there. But anyway, so those are some methods for storing your broth. So really just put it in some jars, put it in the fridge. If you're going to have broth that lasts longer than a week, you can freeze it in some ice cube trays or muffin tins. If you do the ice cubes trays, it's really easy to move the tray and get them out. The muffin tins, what I would do is I would run warm water on the back of it and like pull them out. So that worked well too. Or you can put the jars in the freezer, but just be careful and make sure you really follow those steps, because cracked jars happens really easily. And then note, if you do have histamine intolerance and you're making meat stock, I would not opt for one of the longer storage methods, because the longer you store food, the more histamines it develops. So it's better to just make as much as you're going to eat within a few days and just make your meat stock more often. If you're super duper sensitive, like insanely sensitive to histamines, you might need to be making stock like every day or every other day. Now this is extreme. You will outgrow that. This is not common, but it does happen for some people. So if you're like really struggling with histamines, you might want to make a 2-hour stock at fresh every single day. But as you progress, you'll move on to where like you can have it a few days old or you can have it a week old and it's fine. But I wouldn't really be doing stuff that has to be frozen if you're sensitive to histamines. Okay, so this recipe makes about 4 quarts, so 16 cups of broth. Sometimes I get more, sometimes I get less. It just varies a little bit, but roughly it averages at about 16 cups of broth. Step 6 is to drink your broth. So for drinking it, all you do is heat up your broth. So you can just pour it into a pot, or if you did the broth cube method, you can put some of the cubes in the broth. Then you're going to add salt. I add a lot of salt personally, and heat it up and enjoy. And note, it'll be wiggly and jiggly and look like jello when it's in the fridge. When you heat it up, that will go away and it'll just be like normal broth. So you're not going to be eating some hot clumpy thing. It'll just be like regular broth. Now I recommend that you consume 2 to 4 cups. So that's a measuring cup, so 8-ounce cup of bone broth or meat stock every day to support your gut health, to heal your gut, and just support your overall health too. So many mugs are already 1.5 or 2 cups, so it's pretty much drink a mug or 2 of bone broth a day. I personally have 2 cups of bone broth a day. So you don't have to go crazy, but if you want to do more, it'll definitely help you to heal quicker. Yeah, so again, if you want the written recipe for this broth, I have that up on my blog, hearttokitchen.com. I will leave a link down below. And I have a lot of other gut healing ancestral recipes on my website. So I'll leave a link to all my recipes down below as well, so you can check them out if you want more gut healing recipes. And I recently made another video in this kind of style where I'm walking you through a recipe for my liver and heart pate recipe. That's another food I recommend you get in regularly for healing your gut. So if you want to see how I make pate and get all my tips and tricks to make liver taste way better, you can check out that recipe right here. And then also, again, if you are unsure if you should be having meat stock or bone broth, then I'll link my video right here that will help you decide which is better for you. Thank you so much for watching.